Okay, time to start on the rear bumper for this Pajero Mini. Obviously, I'm going to begin by disconnecting all of the plastics and that little center section of the stock rear bumper and seeing what I have to deal with. And maybe today I can get the mounts built at least and get some measurements for the bumper itself, but I don't imagine I'll get a lot more done as it is Saturday and I'm probably only going to put in a few hours. Welcome back to Balmer's Workshop. It is always great to have you here. So last time, or the time before last, we were working on this Pajero, however you say it, Mini. We did a front bumper and a front skid plate for it. If you haven't looked at that video already, please do check it out, or that video series rather. And here we go with the rear bumper. Let's do this, and next will be sliders. I've removed the rear bumper, which, like the front bumper, came off in three pieces, a center section and then the corners, and I've exposed the original mounting points, which are very small little captive nuts. They are welded into the backside. You can see that lower one right there. The upper one is hidden within the frame cavity. It was also mounted with a bolt up there, same type, and then down below. So those are the stock mounts, and that is definitely not going to be enough to support a swing away rear bumper. This thing will have a receiver hitch on it as well. It will not be designed for towing this tiny little vehicle. Without being insulting to it, it can barely pull its own weight, let alone a trailer. But the reason we're putting a receiver mount on there is in case he wants to add a cargo rack or a bike rack or something like that one day. So my point being is this bumper has to be really solidly mounted, even though it's never going to be used for towing. It might be used for recovery purposes, it might be used for a cargo rack, it will be used for a swing out tire carrier, so it does need to be really solid. So what I did was look for tow hitch locations, which of course there were none, but what there were in the bottoms of the frames were captive nuts on the bottom and the side, and that held on, whoops, let me turn it around, this tow bracket. So this is a stock tow bracket, and those are the locations that it bolts into. I have removed it, and I'm going to use that as a lower bumper bracket mount. On this side, however, it does not exist. This is a tie-down point that's just been welded to the frame, spot welded to the frame, but the dimensions of that frame pad are exactly the same. What I'm going to do is take my spot weld cutter, cut the spot welds out of this piece and remove it, and then I'll be left with a flat platform or flat pad on the bottom of the frame here. That is very similar to the other side of the vehicle, and also this side of the frame will be very similar to the other side of the vehicle. Now if I wanted to mirror that bracket, I'd have to add captive hardware to the bottom of the frame as well as the inside of the frame, but in this case we've got a muffler bracket and some other stuff in the way. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to actually do it exactly the same as this side rather than mirror it. So this attaches to the inside of the frame, or the right hand side of the frame, and the bottom of the frame, and this one is also going to attach to the right hand side of the frame and the bottom side of the frame. So what I'm going to do is again remove this tie down point with my spot weld cutter, leave a nice clean surface with any luck, and then we will just put this guy in place, mark those hole positions, and I will probably create myself some nut plates, and we will weld the nut plates onto the frame side and bottom. Alright, so my spot welds are cut, at least virtually all the way through. I don't want to go too deep, otherwise I may do what I did right there, which is to go right through the frame. As you can see by this little cross section here, the frame is actually thinner than this tie-down tab. So it's pretty challenging to go to the right depth, but I believe I have done that with most of the rest of them. So now let's take an air chisel and see if we can get this to come free. If not, we'll go a little deeper with the spot weld cutter. This is now more or less ready to be drilled out. I managed to split the frame. I keep calling it a frame. It's actually a unibody vehicle, but it does have what represents frame rails running right from front to back. So we'll continue referring to this as a frame, even though it's actually a unibody frame rail. Anyway, when I was air chiseling the tie down point off of here, I wound up splitting the frame a little bit, so I will weld that up and make a nice patch, blend that out. We'll drill these guys out, and then I'm going to attach this piece which I made. This has to be drilled out as well, but basically I use this as a template. You can see that my hole centers are nice there, and again that they line up very well under here. So this we won't use anymore, but I will use this as a mock-up for the bracket that's going to support the bumper, and therefore this is a perfect plate to plate the frame with. So we'll drill this out, pop it up in place. I'm going to have to make a radius on these top corners so that I can more easily weld up in there, and then on the back sides in here I'll weld some 3/8 hardware, 3/8 nuts, and we'll have holes large enough that those nuts can be inserted straight inside, and then that way we've got a decent frame plate with threaded holes for me to attach my bracket to that I'll create. So that is the next step. Alright, and here we have a 3/8 nut, which is what I'm going to be applying to the back side of that plate. So we just have to find the appropriate size hole to drill for it to fit through, and that is my bare minimum, which is 5/8. So I'll probably go to 11/16, I would say, just to give myself a little bit of wiggle room around that. So we'll drill those 4 holes in the frame rails out to 11/16. Plate is all welded up with nuts on the back side of it, as you can see, and it is in place and ready to go. So this is going to drop my holes by about 1/8 of an inch all around, because this is an 1/8 of an inch thick material, and of course I'm losing that 1/8 of an inch right here, and I'm bringing everything out by 1/8 of an inch. So although it is the bracket is symmetrical to the other side, the overall bracket position will be ever so slightly off, so I'll have to compensate for that later. I did take time-lapse of, or I started to take time-lapse of the construction of this bracket and cutting the holes in the frame here and so forth, but my battery died. My time-lapse camera, I'm having some real issues with it. It's not working well at all lately. The battery's barely lasting, and it has troubles communicating with the computer, as does this camera. So even my real-time videos are super challenging. If you want to support me and help me to get better equipment so that you can enjoy the videos more and more often, please subscribe. That is a huge thing, and it would be doing me a major favor. So please subscribe if you'd like continued content and improved video and audio. I've got the brackets nicely welded up. I'm quite happy with that. And we're good to go on this side, which is the side where I modified the frame rail. However, this side, although the bracket went in really well, and I'm happy again with my weld up, one of these captive nuts, stock hardware on the vehicle, let me just get the camera in place there, has either stripped or the nut itself has come free. The captive nut is no longer a captive nut. I can turn that all day long and it won't tighten. So I'm going to have to pull my bracket off and probably do exactly the same modification that I did over here to this inside frame rail. The hardware is all there for me, but it's just not strong enough. So unfortunately, I think I'm probably going to have to cut this all apart and do both sides the same. The first stage is finally complete. I have my brackets mounted to my frame. They are double shear style, of course, as we noted earlier. So we've got 2 different planes that are secured to the frame, and then we've got some tubes that will weld to the back side of the bumper, and they are bolted in 3 positions to these brackets that are mounted to the frame. The way that I did that is that I just cut some 1-inch holes through some 1.5 by 1.5 tube, and on the other side of those 1-inch holes are 25/64 holes for 3/8 bolts to go through. And then up above that, I have put a little tab of 3/16 thick 1-inch flat bar, and I just did some 45-degree cuts on the ends of that to make it look nice. And that is bolted through the upper bracket as well, thereby making a nice secure mount for the bumper. And of course, I've done the same thing on this side. Now, in my last little clip there, I had said that the one bolt up in this corner was stripped, or something, or the nut was stripped, or it had come free and was no longer captive. Neither of those were the case, very luckily for me. All I had to do was replace my stock hardware with some new, longer hardware. The issue was that the stock hardware just wasn't quite long enough to go through the 1/4-inch thick bracket that I created. It was, you can see these are tapered bolts, and they've got a little sort of a tap cut into them. I guess you'd call that kind of a tap cut. Anyway, it was only grabbing the stock hardware inside of the vehicle frame with just a few threads, and what was happening is I had stripped the bolt, luckily not the nut. So again, I just had to extend all my hardware, and it worked out really well. So now we're ready. What I'm planning on doing is making a 2x5, what I'm planning on doing is using a 2x5 tube for the center section of the rear bumper. So here's an example piece of 2x5 tube, and basically it's going to wind up against the back of this guy thusly. This is far too long right now, I know that. I'm going to shorten it. Always better to go too long than too short. But basically the customer wants to have a nice place to step up here with a top plate, a checkered steel top plate up here. So that's the idea. I'll just shorten these tubes down as much as necessary to give myself what I want. I'm probably going to look for about 5 inches past the rear door here, and it looks like what I have right now is probably more like 10. So we're going to cut it down considerably, but that's our starting point. Okay, so we're back on the ground now, and I have my center section cut out. This is a 2x5-inch tube, 3/16 wall. I would have gone with 1/8 wall because this vehicle really doesn't need something quite this stout, but this is what I keep in stock, and to buy a whole stick of 1/8 wall for this little project would have been silly. So it's a little bit overbuilt, but anyway, the point is, this is what's going to be the center section of the bumper. It's actually going to sit lower. It's going to butt up against these tubes rather than sit on top of them. And so I need to shorten them. So I made them longer than I needed so that I could sit it on top, so that I could determine a comfortable amount of stick out from the vehicle. I'm happy with what I have now. And so I've marked those positions on these tubes. So now I'm going to remove this center section. I'll cut those tubes to length. I'll put the center section on some stands, and I'll butt it up against those tubes and possibly tack them in place. The idea is that we're going to have a top plate on here. The top plate obviously is going to come underneath the door. That'll be checkered steel, and that'll give him something to step on to get up to a roof rack or whatever he wants to do. It'll also have a receiver here, not for towing. This vehicle is definitely not capable of towing, but for a bike rack or for cargo rack. And then I'm going to angle in the sides just slightly. I can't go too tight in because I've got to allow room for a swing away hub here, and then I'll build up some decent looking corners. So that's the plan. So I have my approximate bumper position dialed in now. That's more or less where I want it to be. That's the amount of stick out I'm happy with. And it's sitting very close to 90 degrees to the vehicle, or 90 degrees to the ground. And it lines up nicely in every aspect. We do wind up with the tubes that are the mounts protruding below the bumper, which looks really ugly. So what I'm going to do is cut them on these angles here and leave just a little bit of holding material at the top, which will be, of course, welded to the bumper. And then this, after I've cut this off, I'll cap the bottoms just to make it look a lot nicer. And then I'm going to add some gussets, which I have here. and they are going to go in thusly, and that's where I will get my strength from. It goes right to the top of the bumper and close to the back of the vehicle, but not too close that it's ever going to touch or be an interference issue at all. So that's the plan. I'll make these cuts now, put the bumper back in place, tack everything together. I guess I'll cut the tubes and cap them actually and blend them out, get them looking good. And then we'll tack the bumper and gussets up, and then I've got a solid structure to kind of work from to create all my sides and my top plate and everything else. And that will be a tomorrow thing. We're getting close to the end of the day, so I'll probably just get these mounts finished for today. Now that I've got this bumper tacked in place, I noticed that this side of the bumper is ever so slightly higher than the other side. Initially I thought that the door had just had a tiny bit of sag in it, which it may well have, but measuring off of the frame or the unibody, I do have a tiny discrepancy. So I'm going to correct that, but I'm going to do that later. It's something that I can approach later. I have a very limited amount of time with this vehicle now. The customer's picking it up today, so we'll bring it back another day to finish the rear bumper. He just doesn't have any more time for it, and neither do I. But we'll send away the front bumper and the skid plate for sandblasting and powder coating, and then we'll bring him back in and complete the rear bumper later. He is going to get, I think I mentioned earlier in the video, he's going to get a little bit of a lift put in this thing, and he's going to get some bigger tires, and I think even different wheels as well. So being as I'm creating a swing away bumper for this thing, I need to have a wheel and tire to match up to my swing arm, make sure everything fits just right. So I couldn't complete it now even if he had the time for it. So I will just move forward from the point that we're at. So now that this is tacked together, I've clamped a piece of flat bar on the side of the bumper at approximately a 12-degree angle, and my reason for doing that is so that I have somewhere to put my next piece. And there we go. So that now sits at a 12-degree angle, which matches the rear of the vehicle quite nicely and still allows me enough room in this area to put my swing away hub when I receive that. That's on order. And I'm going to, much like my sidekick bumpers and bumpers that I've done for other vehicles as well, I'm going to sweep these wings of the bumper. I generally call this portion the wing. You can call it the side or the wing, but I'm going to sweep that up towards the outside of the vehicle to give it a nice look and to give it a little bit better departure angle for the tires. The crosshairs that you see marked there basically indicate the position. I'll show you on the other side of the vehicle where I haven't added a wing yet. It indicates the position of this furthest out piece of the sheet metal. That is the vehicle itself. I don't want that to be exposed. That will look unattractive. Having said that, I mean, you're almost never viewing the bumper from this angle. When you're standing, you're looking at it like that. So I can cut my angle a little higher than that, but I don't want to go too much higher. And those crosshairs represent that point. So basically what I'm going to do, I'll just put you in a tripod here. So again, basically what I'm going to do is put a bit of an angle on this guy. So I can choose how far out from this point I want to go and how far up on this point I want to go in order to still correspond with that point. So in other words, if I hold my square on that point, I can angle it anywhere I like within this range. I don't want to go too close to my cut line. I want to make sure I've got some webbing in there to make a nice stable joint rather than coming right to a point with my cut. So I'll leave myself at least an inch, and I probably don't want to go any less than 2 inches over here. What I'm planning on doing is bringing the bumper up in this area over to here, and then of course it's all going to come up in here as well. So basically it's going to be a progressive climb or progressive rise of the bumper as it approaches the fender of the vehicle or the quarter panel of the vehicle. So I wanted to create a fairly smooth look with that. So again, I'll probably go 1, maybe even 2 inches out. Yeah, in order to get the angle I want, I'm going to go 2, possibly even 3 inches out. And I think I will go 2 inches here. So I'll start, I'm going to grab a different square. Okay, so I'm comfortable with 2 inches from the top of the tube, which is right there. So that's going to be one point, and then the other one I'm just adjusting the angle by look here. I just want to see what I think would look attractive. You know, the steeper I go, obviously the further out from the center of the vehicle I come, and there's going to be a happy point there. And to me, that happy point I think is something like that. So I'll just make a little mark about there, and then we'll measure how long that actually is. That is almost exactly 3 inches. Pretty much bang on. So I will keep that point. And then I'll just draw a line between them. And rather than do that in an awkward position right here, I'll pull this off of the vehicle and draw the line. All right. So that's about how it will sit on the vehicle. And I've made my cut line. I think that looks quite attractive. I'll bring the camera back around behind the vehicle so you can get a better look at it. But you can see that that point is covered. Even if a person was to crouch down and look directly from you know, the level of the bumper, they still wouldn't see that sheet metal protruding, which makes me happy. Again, I could have gone higher than that, and still you wouldn't have seen it, because from a standing position your eyes are much, much higher. But in this case it just didn't need it anyway, so there you are. I think I'm quite happy with that. I'll bring you back here so you can get a different perspective on it. So I think that'll make a nice little sweep. And I'll just bring you forward here. And then of course, the swing away hub will sit in this area. In behind that, I'll make a fill plate so that you don't see any of this. It'll just be filled in. You'll have a hub here. I'm not completely sure what I'm going to do in this area yet, but obviously I will have to fill that. There's going to be a top plate, a checkered steel top plate over the bumper that's going to go underneath the door. So I'm going to have to work that into this area and kind of blend everything together, the backing plate here into the top plate, and make it look good. So I'm not completely sure what I'm going to do with that yet. That's going to be when the vehicle comes back. I certainly won't get that done today. I'm going to probably tack these together today after I cut this angle, and I may do the other side as well, most likely. And if I have any time left, which is probably unlikely to be honest, at working on the corner piece of the bumper. So again, what I want to do is kind of come up from this point to more or less to this point with a decent gap, and then straight out here, and obviously follow my line down and just kind of fill that in as nicely as I can. I'm probably going to use a piece of 2x5 tube, or 2x something tube anyway, that's going to come off of here, so it will protrude out the side of the vehicle a little bit, which I think is a good thing. It's going to protect it from obstacles and so forth. And again, this is going to be cut at 2 inches here, so it's from this point that we're going to be coming out and up, and I think that's going to look really good. But I kind of doubt we'll get that far today, but we'll see what happens. I use a fine point silver grease pencil to mark my lines. I find it really accurate. And for my cutting, I use a freehand plasma cutter. I use a Longevity 42 amp, I believe it is. Other brands are available, and I am certainly not sponsored, but my plasma cutter works well. I'm very happy with it. It cuts clean up to 1/4 inch, no problem at all, and I never cut over 1/4 inch, so That works for me, and after I'm done my cuts, I go ahead and clean them up, as you can see here, using a 4.5-inch grinder with a 4.5-inch backing disc on it, but with a 5-inch sanding pad. I like to have my sanding pad a little bigger than the backing pad. And I use as coarse a grit of a sanding pad as I can possibly get my hands on, which for me is a 24 grit. That's going to work way better for you, and in my case it works way better for me than a grinding disc ever will. Very, very clean finish you get from it. Nice sharp edges, and they're reasonably affordable as well. So I would recommend a really coarse sanding disc for your initial for sanding down your initial welds, and then for blending everything out, I use a 5-inch grinder with a flap disc on it, and that's generally got a 36 or a 40 grit flap disc in it, and with that you can create a really clean radius, which is what you see me doing here. Now, as I was working this edge, unfortunately I discovered a little porosity, and that's why you can see me zip grinder or zip disc cutting that out there. And again, after I've welded it up, I've got to sand it down and blend it out to match everything. But far better to take the time and do things correctly rather than to ever send anything out that has any porosity in it. I guess I must not have gotten rid of all the nitriding on the edge of my steel from the plasma cutting, and that's probably what caused the porosity in that case. I have plasma cut the angles on the wings, or the sides if you prefer the terminology, of the bumper, and I have sanded and blended them out to the point that I'm happy with them, and I have one of them in place, again just placed on that piece of flat bar that I've clamped to the bottom of the center section, and then I'm supporting it as well with a telescopic stand, a simple telescopic stand that I built here in the shop, at its correct position. So that's nice and flat and true. We've got a 3/16 gap, which is equal to the wall thickness of the tube, so it's ready for weld up. So I will turn you back on time lapse, and we'll tack this one in place, make sure that its angle is correct at 12 degrees. I've already checked it, and it is correct at 12 degrees. But of course, after tacking, we'll double check that, and we'll add the other side. And I think that's about it for today. And then this video will be on the shelf for a little while until the vehicle comes back again. And that brings to a close the first episode of the rear bumper build for this wonderful little Mitsubishi Pajero, however you say it, Mini. Thanks so much for joining me. Please do come back for the next one. As you can see in the pictures here, this thing develops into a pretty awesome little rig, and so I hope you'll join me for the rest of the journey on it. Please be safe, be good to your loved ones, and we'll see you again next time here at Balmer's Workshop. Take care.